Derya Unutmaz is not some Silicon Valley futurist. He's an NIH-funded immunologist with 35 years of published research, authoring more than 100 papers, a Jackson Laboratory professor who's received $10.5 million in federal funding. OpenAI selected him as one of 10 scientists to test GPT-5 on a real scientific experiment. He gave it a complex cancer study, and it predicted his results in minutes. But since then, he has made a series of claims that almost no one else in his field will co-sign, that all disease will be cured within a decade, and that 50% of white-collar work can easily be automated this year. But predicting an experiment is not curing a disease. And so far, the gap between what AI promises and what it delivers keeps growing. So is he just early with his predictions, or is he overselling what AI can actually deliver? We are talking AI, disease, and so-called biosingularity with immunologist Derya Unutmaz. All right, Stephen, so Derya doesn't just think AI will transform medicine. He is calling biosingularity, which is the moment when the convergence of AI and biotechnology will radically transform human biology. He's calling it the biggest discovery really since the beginning of time, bigger than fire, bigger than antibiotics. Are we overblowing this?
Well, if he's right. I mean, he makes a lot of bold predictions, right? He talks about AGI, in 2026, where everybody else is talking about 2028, 2030. He's talking about SGI, super general intelligence, where computers are cleverer than human beings by next year or the year after. So if he's right, then yes. But the question is, Laila, is he right?
I think it's just a really, really bold claim, especially from a scientist, where I think you have to approach anything, even if it is incredibly promising, with skepticism. I understand that you don't want to be left behind, so you want to kind of grab onto the opportunity. But I think saying 99%, as in, I think we just have to be super rigorous.
Well, let me play devil's advocate on this, though. Is there not, though, the chance that he's right? Should we not, as a society, put something in place if he is? Because you saw what happened to IBM's share price yesterday. A paper comes out that says that software isn't going to be as necessary as it has been in the past. Their share price goes down 13%. That's billions of dollars in one day.
No, I get that. But I also think that if he's not right, then this is just a huge overreaction. Like, it's so unnecessary for IBM's stock price to be going down by 13%. That's impacting so many people, and you've got so much volatility, which, if it's driven by hype, that's an incredibly turbulent society to live in. Like, why can't we actually, why is there so much uncertainty where we're like, is it hype, is it not hype? Why can't we just scrutinize this in a scientific way?
Well, and you have to believe that he's not pulling these numbers out of thin air, that he has to be making these bold claims and bold predictions based on something that he's really seeing. So let's hope he's right.
And the other thing, though, I would say to you is you can't leave it to the scientists, right? We can't leave this to the scientists.
Yeah, those are fighting words for Laila.
As a society, we've got to put things in place, because if we don't put things in place, then, then we're going to get caught out by this when it happens. So yes, science is important, but we can't leave all this to the scientists. And I think that's what we're doing right now.
But we can't leave it to, the tech bros or the
corporations.
The CEOs, no offense.
All right, to your sides, and we want to know what you think. Is AI really a silver bullet that solves humanity's most difficult problems, or is that exactly the kind of thinking that gets us into trouble? Tell us in the comments below, like and subscribe. Now, here's our conversation with Derya Unutmaz. Derya, thank you so much for your time today. Now, you've made the bold claim that if someone can survive the next 5 years, then they will live for the next 50, all thanks to what AI can accomplish in the medical research field. Before we dive into that claim, can you first kind of narrow down for us exactly what you're referring to when you say AI, and what will change within the next 10 years that will allow me to live for the next 50?
AI and technology in general is increasing exponentially. So, our minds are very used to linear thinking. So we think that whatever the advances happen in the last 10 years, next 7-8 years, we're going to have the same advance. But that's not how it actually works. And I think we can already see that. So the capabilities of technology and now with AI is literally doubling every few months. And this will actually even accelerate further. So we're going to get a point where, what we sort of term as singularity, where every week or sometimes every day, there's going to be huge advances.
Derya, I just want to jump in here. When you're talking about AI, are you talking about LLMs or are you talking about models like AlphaFold? As in, how are you separating them? And when you say they're advancing exponentially and they are going to lead us to this, is that LLMs that you're talking about?
So I think the notion of AI is currently associated with LLMs. In the next year or two, we're going to have what's called the physical intelligence. So, we're going to have the world models. Some of the videos, for example, are generated by diffusion models. And actually what we call LLMs are now becoming very multimodal, right? So, we have the agentic systems, we have the coding abilities, we have the speech, we have the video, we have the images. And then, Google actually just released sort of the world models where you can the AI can understand the world in 3D. Actually, this is going to be very important for biomedical reasons. So, I mean, I see this as a totality of intelligence, artificial intelligence, which is really becoming generalized, what we call general intelligence. So, of course, at the very top, it's the LLMs because that's sort of the reasoning. I mean, this is the way our brains work too, right? So we have a frontal cortex. We can do abstract and cognitive thinking, but then we have areas that control our hands, or or our physical capabilities, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, one of the things that really interested me, listening to you researching, coming up for this, is that you were talking about AGI. This year, 2026, you're talking about AGI. And that's quite early. A lot of people are talking about it in 2 years' time. And my second question is, there was a report, as you'll know, that came out yesterday talking about the 2028 global crisis, and the stock market went crazy. And they were talking about it in 2028, and you're talking about 2026, and you're talking about AGI in 2026. My two questions are, why are you earlier than most people on this? And second of all, do you think as a society we're taking this seriously?
Let me define what I mean by AGI, because this is the problem. AGI means so many different things to so many people. So if you break it down, it means artificial general intelligence. So what general stands for is that can you generalize knowledge? So for example, if we learn something on one topic, we can somehow generalize that information to learn something completely different or understand something completely different. What I think changed now is that the reason I think that we are at AGI, what I call level 1, and actually I think there's going to be 3-4 levels of this. I think ChatGPT showed that, this is the path. If you train enough data, if you do this and that, reinforcement learning, this will just keep increasing in power and intelligence. So it was clear that, they will reach a point where, most of the jobs will be literally replaced. I mean, anything that depends on using computer or your intelligence or your experiences or expertise could be eventually replaced by AI. So I think, the society, or I should say governments or organizations, I don't think anybody were prepared or cared for it, honestly. I mean, there was a lot of talk about AI is a bubble, this is all hype, this cannot continue to scale, and, at some point it's going to stop, and so on and so forth. But I think in the last few months, we start to see that this is going to have a tremendous impact. I mean, you can see like Anthropic announces that they have a new cybersecurity agent, AI model, and then suddenly $50 billion in market value is lost in security companies. Yesterday, they announced that, they can very easily clean the COBOL computer language-based mainframes, and then IBM loses, billions of dollars in market value. And of course, a lot of people are unfortunately going to lose their jobs because most of it is automated, and it will continue to accelerate in automation. So this is we should be very intellectually honest to say that, while I believe AI is the greatest thing that will happen to humanity, because, we'll literally save billions of lives and reach a point of abundance, the path to that is going to be very painful. It's going to be extremely disruptive. And there's no plan, there's no, preparation for governments or organizations, how to deal with that. I mean, the whole education system has to change. What does it, what's the point of going to college just to get a job? 30% of the college graduates cannot find a job in the US right now. So we have to rethink the whole fabric of society. This is the biggest transformation since the beginning of history. And, it's very disappointing that we have very little discussions. Maybe, hopefully it will start this year, but it might be a little late.
But on that note, Derya, do you think LLMs and companies like Anthropic and OpenAI are going to be the ones that take us there? Because there are a lot of critics, and I would say that your timelines are actually ahead of people even like Demis Hassabis, who have a vested interest in this. But Demis doesn't think that our current LLMs are going to get us there. Richard Sutton also has kind of gone back on that and even said that people like Gary Marcus do have a point, that we're hitting a wall. Because a lot of people say that, look, LLMs are just regurgitating things, they're stochastic parrots, that they are telling us nothing new, because obviously they've gone through all the literature and are giving that back to us. And because we communicate in language, we perceive that to be something when it's not. So how would you respond to those people? Because there are plenty of people who have that viewpoint.
And I think I was trying to explain that what people are confusing, like Demis, for example, is not, obviously he's not confusing, but when he says AGI, what really he means is ASI. So ASI is superintelligence. Superintelligence means better than any human. So for example, Demis gave this example. So for if he had cut off the knowledge of the AI models or LLMs to 1911. Can they discover theory of relativity, which was discovered by Einstein? Well, that's an extraordinarily high bar. There are only like few people in the history of humanity who came up with such an incredible insights, right? So for the general public, when I say AGI, I mean, an AI system that's as good as, let's say, the top 1% of humanity, and we're already there. And then the other thing that people are confusing is that, so we have the cognitive, the abstract intelligence, which is actually very new in evolution. It's only about 100,000 years old since Homo sapiens have evolved. The actual biological intelligence has nothing to do with the cognitive, the abstract part. Animals have an incredible intelligence, right? So most of that intelligence is actually about the physical world. So we evolved to survive. So we have to think temporally. We have to think, in 3D format, and we have to think what actions we take will have a consequence. And obviously LLMs or the current AI models don't have that. But we're going to get there. So that's why we need the physical intelligence aspect of it, which requires embodiment like the robots, as well as these 3D world models. But that does not distract from the fact that, most of humanity works on the cognitive level. If you're an electrician or plumber, your job is safe for maybe 5 years or maybe 10 years at most. But if you are, like I'm a scientist, most of my work depends on intelligence expertise. And I can tell you that the current models like GPT 5.2 Pro is just simply better than me. It can come up with better ideas. It can analyze data better. And this is true for many of the physicians, many of the lawyers. So anything that depends on high level thinking and intelligence is going to be replaced fairly soon. The lower, what we call lower level intelligence, is actually physical intelligence, which took several hundred million years of evolution that's kind of imprinted in our minds. We're already born with that. So I don't know if that makes it a little bit more clear. So, but we're going to have a couple of levels of AGI. So I think the next level is going to be having the AI models much greater memory, because this is a huge problem. Once the AI understands the 3D world and experiences that, then you literally get to the ASI, which is the super intelligence. And I'm sure that's what Demis Hassabis mean.
But Derya, we're not there yet. So to bring Laila's question back to your scientific research, when it came to the cancer study that you gave GPT-5, your own papers are a part of the training data for AI. So when it predicted the answer to your experiment, was it really understanding your work, or was it just recognizing what you had already put in? And to that point, does that not give a good argument to the people who say that there will always be a place for the human component?
I trained as a medical doctor. I don't see patients, but, I learned a lot of stuff. I was trained with, thousands of bits of information that were created by other humans. So I didn't create any of that. And then I became a scientist, and I still had to be trained with another 1 million bits of information that was already out there. The only thing that I brought there is that I could make patterns. I could see that, if I did this experiment, I'm likely to get this output, or the output of the experiment means, oh, wow, this is how the mechanism works. So that's the contribution that I'm making, but I'm totally dependent on, millions and millions of papers that have been published already. So our minds is not that different from that. And furthermore, the models right now, and this actually started with the reasoning models with O1 model from ChatGPT from OpenAI, that they are able to think. What that means is that they're able to truly understand the context of what you're giving to them. I mean, the example that I gave for ChatGPT this was an experiment that we had done several years ago. We couldn't figure it out. We couldn't figure out the mechanism. We didn't publish it. And so the GPT 5. Actually it was 5.0 Pro model, within 12 minutes, it already told me the experiments that we did actually several months later. But not only that, it came out with a mechanism that, in retrospect, I should have known. So if the model is not understanding, how is it able to come up with that mechanism that I couldn't come up?
All right. Well, we're going to continue the conversation about the use of AI when it comes to scientific research, because coming up after the break, we're asking Derya why he thinks it's actually unethical for scientists not to use AI. So Derya, when it comes to the use of AI in research, you say it's actually unethical for scientists not to adopt and utilize AI in their work. But given the ongoing issue of hallucinations, do you think it's a bit reckless to make that claim? And shouldn't this be a personal decision that each researcher comes to on their own about when to adopt AI and use it in their research methods?
Actually, I said that first for medical doctors, but it's also true for scientists. I can definitely repeat that for science as well. It's more sort of the ethics is more from the physician's perspective, because there you're trying to treat a patient and you don't want to misdiagnose. So it's very clear that AI. From the example I just gave, is able to see those patterns. And medicine is about pattern recognition. So, when you're making a diagnosis, you have to think of thousands of possibilities and then come up with a diagnosis. So we had done, again, a study where we had, millions of bits of information from a 5-year-old study from a chronic fatigue syndrome subjects. And, it took us about months and months of analysis of that data. In fact, we had used some machine learning at the time. And then eventually, we were able to put a picture of it. So, just to give you an example, I took that data and then gave it to GPT-5 Pro. And again, in matter of 10, 15 minutes, it came up with exactly the same thing, but more stuff that we have actually missed. So I'm contracting months of work to literally minutes.
But I also think that the opposite is true, because there are still limitations to our current AI models. Like, I use GPT 5.2 Pro, and it still confidently tells me things which are completely wrong. Definitely not as frequently as it did, but they do still hallucinate. I mean, it's now the hallucination rate is much smaller, but if a doctor misdiagnosed someone due to AI, who's accountable? Isn't that equally as unethical? So I don't know if we can confidently say that AI is just so infallible, or even more infallible than a doctor or a scientist is at the moment, because if you are confidently so reliant on it, right, as in that can be quite dangerous.
That's the thing. I'd be more concerned about doctors and people in the medical community utilizing AI when it comes to my diagnosis versus in a scientific research situation.
So first of all, I mean, I use AI day and night, literally. So I sleep less right now because I'm so excited. I've been using GPT-5 Pro. Actually, before it came out, I was an early tester. I have not seen a single hallucination in my own field, in biomedicine, like not even one. So I don't know what hallucination, what wrong information you got, but let me put it this way. I mean, we hallucinate all the time. So I'll give you one statistics. In US alone, there are 12 million misdiagnoses every year. Only about 70% of the diseases are diagnosed correctly by medical professionals. And about 700,000 people die or, severely become sick because of misdiagnosis. Okay. So this is an incredible issue. And with AI, if you could improve that by 10%, you're saving hundreds of thousands of lives. And I'm betting everything that AI will improve that, maybe, instead of 12 million misdiagnoses, we're going to have maybe a few 100,000 misdiagnoses. What we have right now is the worst it will ever be. There's going to be new models coming out that are going to be better and better 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. So there is no limit to that. So there's a point where, as I said, I mean, it's not just unethical. It's going to be malpractice not to use AI model. You can write down this and we can talk maybe in a few months or in a year, because, if an AI model is able to diagnose something better than any physician in the world, then not using that would be like, okay, I don't want to use a stethoscope. I'm just going to put my ear on the patient because I trust myself, my intuitions.
I do think it is extremely dependent on the context that you feed it, the memory it has, and the way that you're doing the scaffolding around it, as opposed to kind of just the raw model. I agree the raw model is incredibly powerful, but depending on the context, like you have entire code bases being completely erased when you don't want them to. So they can go off-piste. And so I think it is critical that we know how to, I guess, supplement them or scaffold them correctly, because there is risk there if that's not done properly.
I mean, there's very little risk, but as I said, I mean, the risk of humans is much, much greater even now, and it's going to be much greater very soon. I work on a very, very specific, very complex topic. Biology is very complex.
All right. I like that we're talking about this in utilizing AI in the medical field, because that brings me to my first of our rapid fire questions. And that is, where do you think people will draw the line at bringing AI into their own lives?
I think once people understand the true power of this, I don't think there would be a line. Why would you draw a line when you are getting such an incredible benefit for your daily life, for your health? But of course, I'm sure there will be some people who will refuse to use AI. I mean, there are people in the world who don't use internet or phones, but I think for general population, this is going to be fully integrated into their lives.
Once the trust is there, yeah, I agree.
So Derya, my question is, what is something that's universally accepted in your specific field that you actually disagree with? Which I imagine is quite a lot.
Yeah, quite a bit. I'm not very conventional. So, I mean, I guess the most important one would be that aging is a natural phenomena and it can never be cured or reversed. So I 100% disagree with that.
Derya, my question is that, and you're as you say, thinking somewhat differently to a lot of other people. But what can you see 18 months out or whatever that we're not talking about at the moment?
One thing that's for sure is that there's going to be a tremendous disruption. We might have to question the way we do science. Like, is there any point in publishing papers right now? You send a publication, it takes 6 months to a year to publish something when the world is moving in an hourly, daily basis, when AI models can discover drugs in matter of minutes. So that brings us to a completely different level. Something that maybe people are not talking enough, again, you asked that question, is the shock that we're going to experience in 18 months.
Derya, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate your insights and you taking the time to speak with us. All right, so really fascinating conversation with Derya. Did he make an argument that convinced the both of you that the train is actually moving as quickly as he says it is?
I mean, I like using AI. I use it quite a lot, but I'm especially in science, I'm still very, very skeptical of how fast that's going to move. As in, I wish we could have pushed them a little bit more on the aging and the curing side of curing all diseases, because as in it's not that straightforward. Like, if AI was really, really that good, it would just be you'd send it out into the world and it'd be making $1 million trillion in the stock market. But why is it not, challenging hedge funds? Why is it not, like, there are more bottlenecks along the way in the real world than I think were discussed.
Well, so I'm not a scientist, so, I can't argue, which model of AI is doing this or doing that, whether we're going to get AGI 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. I'm not a scientist. I think the point is that wherever it's at and the speed that it's going is going to cause, as Derya said, massive disruption to society. And there's no point sitting here sort of saying, oh, science is not perfect, and losing, and not taking into effect the effect it's having on society. And the effects it's having on society are now. People are losing their jobs. People are finding it hard to get jobs. People are making millions of dollars on the stock market using AI, and people are losing millions of dollars on the stock market because of AI. So I don't know whether he's right or he's wrong. I understand that he's a little bit maybe further out than others, but I think it's missing the point, because I think the point is, what are we doing about it? And the answer is nothing.
And he did agree with you that no one's taking this seriously enough right now.
Right, and that's what I agree with him on. So I don't know if he's right about the science, right? I mean, what would I know?
He is right about the fact that no one's paying close enough attention.
I think so.
I agree that we shouldn't just sit back and let it happen. But on the other side, we shouldn't just But we shouldn't sit back and be like, oh, well, AI will just solve everything, right? That we should just use AI to teach everyone. We should use AI to do all the science. We should use AI to it's. I don't think it's a silver bullet for anything. So I think both extremes are just not valid.
So what are you going to say to people who don't have a job? What's your advice to people who don't have? Don't worry, the AI is not quite as good as it thinks it is.
I don't think. I wouldn't say that. But I don't know.
Figure out a way to make AI work for you so that you can keep your job versus being replaced by AI now.
Because that's a top level thing that we do need to resolve. But I think also just scaring everyone from just saying that, look, there's nothing you can do, it's coming for you, is equally as unproductive. Where it's like, don't even bother doing anything. Like it's going to be better than you. Don't even bother thinking. Don't even bother trying to come up with a solution, which I think is equally as dangerous.
Right. Well, our huge thank you to Derya Unutmaz for joining us. If you think that AI will cure disease within a decade, or think that it's just a dangerous thing for a scientist to claim, well, then we want to hear from you. Drop your comments below, subscribe, and make sure to like. We will see you next time right here on Agents of Tech.